Today, I'm honored to introduce the very special guest, Andy Zimmerman, to the Hollership today for the Future Humans vodcast show. Andy is the Chief Executive Officer of Journey. Journey is an innovation and design consultancy that focuses on futuristic consumer touchpoints and was conceived to help brands envision, plan, and effectively build the next generation of customer experiences enabled by emerging technologies. Andy's work leans into the innovation and emerging technologies that enables new experiences and disrupts business models. And for the past 7 years, Andy was the CEO of Frog Design, the iconic innovation and design firm. Previously, he was a global managing director and co-founder of Accenture's mobility and interactive divisions, managing director at Idea Lab, the world-famous incubator, and founder and global managing partner for PwC's e-business division. Journey is Andy's next chapter and is also the title of his Amazon bestseller metaphysical novel, quite aptly titled Journey. Welcome, Andy, to the Hollership. How are you today?
Well, thank you. I'm good.
Andy, so tell me, tell the audience about your diverse career background and how you arrived to now the CEO of Journey.
Well, in terms of background, I started out life thinking I was going to be the great American writer and storyteller, and that was my academic training and what I did when I first left college. But then I fell into business completely by accident, just as a way of making money. And then that journey, that business journey, has always been around technology and innovation for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, because I don't consider myself to be a particularly deep technologist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a software programmer. But I've always found myself in these sort of new areas, whether it was the dot-com period at Idea Lab, any business, or the mobile revolution, and now with what's going on with Metaverse and Web 3.0. But that seems to be, what I'm drawn to, whether it's sort of by accident or that's where the universe is pushing me toward. But I think the way I look at it is a little bit different, I think, than people that are into quantum technology, and that I think what's most interesting to me is kind of the human experience and how it's affected by these different technologies, more so than the technologies itself. So it's been a journey, and I'm very excited about the last 6 months. Having left, I was, as you mentioned, running Frog up until the end of last year. I had a great 7-year run. It's one, amazing firm, amazing people, and but then wanted to start up something a little bit different and launch Journey on January 2nd. And so we've been in business for about 6 months.
Wow, that's so incredible. And I saw the NASDAQ bell. That was a very iconic moment. So congratulations. Do you want to speak about that? And as well, I think we've got to mention that the wonderful Kathy Hackle is Chief Metaverse Officer at Journey, which is such a star team right there.
Yeah, no, Kathy and I met each other around this time last year, actually, introduced by a mutual friend, and that led to some conversations about what she was doing and what I wanted to do. Actually, it ties into the NASDAQ opening bell. I think you're referring to the fact about a month ago, we had built a metaverse for NASDAQ in the NASDAQ building and in Times Square. And we were the first, I believe, we're the first stock exchange actually do the opening bell, both in the physical space in NASDAQ building, as well as in a NASDAQ metaverse. And it actually got some pretty good play and coverage from a lot of media. It was the opening of New York NFT Week as well. But it came went through serendipity, because actually House of Beautiful Business, which is a really interesting consulting networking company founded by two ex-Frogs, invited me to this conference in Lisbon, and they wanted someone to speak on the metaverse, and I suggested Kathy. And Kathy and I, while there, met with a creative director who ultimately became the chief creative director for NASDAQ later on, and he reached out to us and said, would you guys be interested in doing a metaverse for an opening bell? And of course we said yes, and we didn't have much time. We only had about 2 weeks to do it, but it all came off very, very beautifully. The funny thing was, on the opening bell, we were covered by CNBC, the business news channel, and
Yes.
Jim Cramer, who at least is a well-known figure in the U.S., I don't know about Australia, starts talking about. He says, "Oh, this Journey company, it's they do things in the metaverse, and I guess they're going, they went public today." So it was kind of funny because a lot of people reached out to me and said, "Hey, you went in public with this company?" I said, "No, no, no, we just rang the opening bell." But so it was a great experience.
Yeah, incredible. I really appreciate that story. And I think it's a very iconic moment because it's like the metaverse, to me, I see it as like this new creative digital renaissance in a way. And so, with that and what the metaverse means to Journey in terms of creating new consumer brand experiences and disrupting traditional business models, where do you foresee the future of interactivity, experiential, and consumer touch points in the metaverse with Journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing for me is you have sort of two sort of converging sort of movements. One is the gaming industry, where it's been well established and obviously generating huge audiences and related revenue and so on. And then you have sort of innovation going on in the VR kind of AR world that enables sort of 3D experiences that previously just weren't available. And then you have brands and companies and products trying to sort out, okay, I know this sort of 3D Web 3.0 sort of world is coming. How do we play? And it turns out it's quite complicated. It's not as, I mean, in a weird way. I was around for .com. I was a managing director of a company called Idea Lab, which we started up a lot of the .com companies. And I tell people it was a lot easier back then with the web. I mean, there's just a sort of one platform, and it's like put up a website, right? I think in this world there's so many platforms, there's so many technology issues around wearables and so on, and then the economics and then crypto and so forth, that it's a much more complicated situation as a company and brand. And so right now what we're recommending with brands is just, it's time to experiment, it's time to discover, and it's going to take a while before a lot of things sort out, both in terms of technology and business model. But you can't wait until everything is solved, right? One CEO of one of our clients, a very large company, one of the largest in the world, said, Andy and Kathy, I missed out on the internet. I missed out on mobile. I don't want to miss out in the metaverse. And that's sort of the thinking of these companies. They just want to be there and experiment and kind of watch what technologies succeed and emerge, what use cases are the initial ones that are successful, and so on.
Right. And so when you advise and talk to companies and they want to activate in the metaverse, where do you generally start when you have these sorts of conversations?
It's a little bit of understanding their brand and their brand architecture and history and the demographics of their consumer base, either their current consumer base or where they want to go. Then I think we tend to say, okay, let's look at some best practices out there, which is a little hard to identify because everything's so new. But we do see certain companies, brands having more or less success with their initial marketing activations and presence in the metaverse. So what can we learn from that, even if they're in your industry or related industries? And then with that, we typically identify a couple pilots, and we say, okay, if this is the audience you're interested in, let's go to Roblox. Let's have this kind of activation. Let's have this kind of game. Maybe some partnering that you might want to do, and let's do a launch and see how that goes, and so forth and so on. So it's that tends to be the initial phase of any project we do with a brand, and a lot of it's almost like educational,
Yeah.
particularly with very senior executives. A lot of it's around educating them in terms of what's going on, because it's a lot to absorb.
There's definitely a lot to absorb, and it's great that like there's all these books out there like Navigating the Metaverse by Kathy, and I think it really helps as like just an onboarding kind of education about how to activate in the metaverse and learn from all these use cases and all of that. So I'm going to pivot and talk about more like human-centric design. So like Steve Jobs, he would always say it's like about the people just as much as the technology. And we're at this very pinnacle point in human history where there's all these amazing technologies and they're converging, like blockchain, AI, XR. But at the same time, we've got the storytellers and it's about the people. And so what can you speak to that in terms of Journey's role in bringing forward what you specialize as well in, human-centric design and storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of something I'm very passionate about. And you mentioned Steve Jobs and human-centric design, and then Frog. And I don't know if you know, but Frog is really became famous because of the relationship that the founder of Frog had with Steve Jobs.
Yes.
And Frog designed the Snow White design language, the Macintosh, Lisa, Nextcube, all those sorts of things with Jobs and with Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And the underlying thesis of Frog's founder, Hartmut Essinger, was that form follows emotion, which is different than the Bauhaus school of design where he came from, which was form follows function. So Hartmut's thesis and mine, I've been convinced, most people make decisions and their experiences operate on much more of an emotional level than intellectual level. And I think that's going to be true in the case of this next wave of technology innovation. So, as Jobs says, any technology is kind of neutral. It can be used or abused depending on the human element of it. And that's how I think it's going to work in terms of these new innovations. So it's really understanding that, you need to connect with customers and users on an emotional level. And if you do that, then you're probably going to have a good business model and you're going to reap the benefit of that. And so, metaverse is tricky because, emotions are still, most people have not had many emotional experiences in the metaverse. Now you're as a pioneer, you are having them every day, and you are the first avatar that I've been interviewed by. So see, this is different for me, right? So, I think that, understanding that in this conversation we're having, for example, I'm adjusting emotionally, right, to the fact that I don't know that I really know who you are, because visually, you're obviously not a human portrayal. Your voice, on the other hand, the ambient voice is very natural, yes, very much what it would be whether or not you're an avatar. And so, we can't underestimate what's happening at an emotional level, even at something like this interview, let alone if you're having your first metaverse experience as a human being.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. To be honest, it's been a very interesting experience speaking as the avatar. But what I have noticed is Teddy Pahagbia, he put it very eloquently, like the word avatar comes from the ancient Sanskrit word avatara, apparently, which means descent. So if you kind of extend that theory of like it's our consciousness with our physical meat flesh avatar human bodies, and then we project that into these virtual characters, it could be in the positive light capturing your true essence, because people aren't perceiving just from the pure physicality and they're more focusing on the human voice. Like you said, of course there's the projection of the portrayal of this character. So I see that as a very positive thing as well, for diversity and also storytelling. And then you got the flip side of it, which is the Wild West of the metaverse as well, which, deep fakes and you talking to a human, proof of humanity, and all these interesting things. So when Journey is talking with companies and activating the metaverse and doing all these strategies, how do you bring into account like all the ethics and the regulation, as well as this general community vibe of Web3, which I've noticed is very much based around authenticity and community?
Well, yeah, this is something, and mind you, as an older person, I have both the benefit of previous generations of technology, but also the burden of leaving them behind and learning the new. And one of the areas that I've really learned a lot about is community in 3.0 and how different it is. And we actually partner with a company that builds and moderates Web 3.0 communities. And they make a case it's quite different. It's really next gen social, and it's much more democratic and level playing field than when you really think about it. Even things like Facebook, which feel, very democratic and open, a lot of the actual communication is one to many. And particularly for brands, it's one to many. I mean, it's basically advertising and so on. And one of the things we tell clients is, as a brand, you have to understand you're moving into a different community vibe. And it's very democratic, it's very unstructured. And in fact, as an organism, it resists attempts to provide structure that isn't kind of authentically generated by the community itself. I think this is a really, really interesting, challenging situation from a marketing point of view, because you do want to have some control over your brand and your brand architecture, but you also want to touch and have impressions with that community. And so you're going to have to show a lot more flexibility. I mean, even visually, you need to show a lot more flexibility. And some of the most iconic brands, this is really hard. I mean, you have brands that have had, a certain color, look, and feel for 40 years, and now moving to this new world, they have to kind of embrace it and take risks that just you don't learn in business school. It's like a no-no, but when you go out and pioneer in these spaces, you have to be willing to take those risks. So that's one of the things we tell people. You're going to have to give up some of your brand sort of authority if you're going to be accepted by the community, and if you're going to be interested community, and that's a real hard thing, I think, for some of our clients.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting. I think Benoit put it quite interestingly. He's from Artifact, and they have the clones and their community, and he was talking about equity of, like, traditionally of a brand versus in this Web3 community space, the equity, you're taking into account the community like on a whole new level if they've got more agency and more ownership. For instance, if you are a clone and you can activate that and talk as a character like I am today and potentially monetize off that, and you're forming in real time the perceptions and impressions of the brand. So, there's only so much as a brand that you can control of that. And so, when we're in this crazy new world of that sort of equity, coming from your very expertise background, like how do you manage the dynamics and the balance of keeping the equity of a brand that's very well known and loved, but at the same time giving agency to the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think part of it is probably recognizing that your brand, you're going to have to diffuse your brand a little bit, so you begin to be very creative about what's a common thread that is common, to my brand, and what part of it am I going to release into the community and let them play with and kind of co-create with me. And I think that's sort of one kind of a way of thinking of brand architecture here is what I want to have as common, and then what do I let people, have the ability to change or mutate or create. And I think there's answers there. I mean, I think it's something that can be done. I mean, but I just find that it's almost like saying, it used to be you could run the same TV ad on every station, on the sports program, something else. And now all of a sudden, the ads have to be so specific and customized, and in some ways co-created, that you just have to be willing to kind of let that go. Some brands are going to be very successful with that, and some aren't. I mean, that's just that will be one of the success criteria. I think in general, if you think back, I mean, the day of just a iconic brand that's been around forever, that day is kind of leaving anyway. It's just very hard to sustain something for like 100 years or even a decade at this point. So, that's another just trend in general. People tend to change, even the mega brand architecture and visuals tend to change more often today, say, that every few years or whatever, than say, 50 years ago. partly just the impatience and kind of attention span of people, I guess.
Right, yes, attention span. I have a lot to say about that. But I'll just pivot now to you mentioned customization and personalization and coming from a marketing as well background. It's like that fine line, isn't it? Like if you're using, artificial intelligence versus human recommendations. And I heard in a previous podcast you were talking about HBO Max and your strategy as well with that, combination of human-centric recommendations for that social aspect as well as artificial intelligence. So if we expand this concept like to the spatial metaverse, how do you think humanity will respond when there's this general pivot away from Web 2 mentality of you don't control your data and it's targeting you with all these ads from the artificial intelligence to a more I own my own data, but I would like to use AI to have a more personalized experience, but I feel in control.
Yeah. I mean, I think, something like music, you can sort of see how that works a little bit, where you can say, I'll give up some of my, it's kind of not even opt in, but you're kind of voluntarily giving up some of my data about what I listen to. And in return, you'll recommend what I listen to, but also you'll create playlists that have themes that you may think I'm interested in. And what's interesting to me is, and I lost track of this, but I guess today 98% of playlists in Spotify are created through algorithms versus by individuals, which certainly was not the way it started out. And what that says to me is it's all about, if you're entertaining me and if you're fulfilling a need, in this case, music entertainment or whatever, and you do a better job of it than I could do myself, because I don't have time to go through, a million songs and figure out the DNA of each and the genetics and what's going to appeal to me. Then I'll give up data all day because I end up with a better experience. Now, there are other cases where maybe that wouldn't be the case, but I look at something like music and I'm like, hey, AI has created better experiences for me personally by using data I'm giving it.
Right.
And I have a combination of, it's a combination of comfort in terms of music I know I like, but also some discovery as well, which is kind of cool. So, I mean, I think that like AI is like any other technology, it can be used or abused. But in case of music, I think it's been net quite a positive thing.
Yeah, for sure. And when we expand in the metaverse, I know you're very passionate about spatial audio. Is it skilled creative that combines? Yes. I'd love to hear more about that and where you see audio, the future of audio in terms of marketing and the metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, for me, voice is kind of the great unheard channel, in the sense that I think it's taken for granted. It has been around for 100,000 years. It's a very easy to use interface. It's very universal, subject to language, and therefore, because it's so simple, it's so pervasive. It's almost taken for granted. And yet I do think I was with someone the other day that was talking about their first VR conference. This is somebody in one of the biggest companies in the world, and they're having a big executive meeting, and for the first time virtually. And, this is what a lot of the big companies are doing now, right? And just experimenting. I think it was with Oculus headsets. And what she said to me, she said, what was the coolest thing about this experience versus, say, Zoom or something, was not so much that I could see people and I could sit beside them and, they're like recognizable avatars of who they are. She said, but what was really cool is that when they spoke to me, it was like they were right next to me. And in Zoom, that's not the case.
No.
In Zoom, Teams, it's coming from a screen. While, with 3D spatial voice, it is right next to me. And I mean, I'm always struck. I mean, a movie I just loved was Her, which was where what's his name was having, this relationship with this voice, this woman.
Yes.
And what you realize is it is the most intimate of interfaces as well. You can argue some elements of physical might be that intimate, but certainly voice has this intimacy. So I think it's a very untapped channel. And it's going to turn out that it's the one interface you can always rely on. and you can use in a somewhat universal way. So our theory is that over time, the voice interface will be the common interface for any experience, physical, digital, or virtual. It's the one thing you kind of hang on to, and across platforms and so forth and so on. But on in the here and now, you mentioned HBO Max, but I mean, there we've developed and won a Webby Award for the work we did for them, which was a discovery application on voice. So you could talk to Alexa or Siri and ask about, what's the latest horror series on HBO Max and who's in it, that sort of thing. And, particularly it's used a lot in places like kitchens, where people are using their hands and they'd be looking away from screens if they had screens, but they can still talk and they can still hear. So, food commerce is the biggest category for voice right now. People buying groceries and stuff over voice channel. It's about a $40 billion business right now, which nobody, it's pretty unbelievable, right?
Wow, incredible. Yeah.
So you talk about metaverse, and maybe there's been a couple $1 billion of real estate on the metaverse, and there's $40 billion of groceries being bought on the voice channel. So it just isn't, for some reason, it's just not sexy enough, or I don't know, for some reason people don't seem to be focusing on it the way we are on these other touch points that but we're very, very bullish on voice.
Yeah, and often it's the untapped, that's the blue ocean market potential that you can make sexy. And so speaking about entertainment and all that, what do you think is going to be the future? Because this is of something of interest to me, being a entertainment brand. What do you foresee as the future of entertainment in terms of AR, VR, XR, the metaverse, beyond? And I see that Journey is part of as well, transforming physical venues and making them metaverse ready. They call it the digital kind of experience. You have that one in Times Square reimagining. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we think what's going to be happening is there's a structure being built in Las Vegas called the Sphere by Madison Square Garden, which is the largest man-made sphere in the world. And the outside wall of that sphere is actually going to be a screen, which would, a movie screen or a visual screen. It'll be 10,000 times the size of the largest IMAX screen. And then inside will be an immersive experience, whether it's live concerts or movies or whatever. And, what we see is like physical just extending with immersive experience capabilities and so forth, becoming somewhat virtual looking. And, if you look at some concerts, you look at the latest Beyonce Jay-Z concert from a couple of years ago, or even some like U2, they almost look like they are virtual experiences. I mean, the characters are floating in space. There's big pictures of them up in the sky behind the little body floating around.
Yeah.
I mean, it might as well be, an immersive experience.
Yeah.
So we're sort of seeing the convergence of that. And we're working with some creative talent that comes from the concert design space that we think will be very useful when you're trying to build these sort of immersive experiences or virtual experiences. And it's about people moving through time and space with light and sound. It's a 3D design, not a 2D flat screen design. And the other thing is we think entertainment and music and fashion are going to be, some of the most successful early use cases in the metaverse. They already are, because you can draw audience, and it's just very powerful, both in terms of the user's experience and the celebrity or talent's opportunity to reach millions and millions of people.
Yes.
Pentakill's concert on Fortnite reached, I think, 140 million people, which is as much as Rolling Stones have had in concerts in their history, in their 50-year history. So I think it's going to be one of the initial really successful use cases.
I agree, because it's culture, and something's got to populate these metaverse spaces as well. And obviously the metaverse is just as much the physical reality as the extended digital layers. So what I really appreciate that you're doing at Journey is like you're honoring all realms of reality and bringing it together, and acknowledging the gamification as well of those experiences to make it immersive. So the future is very exciting. So with that, Andy, what is your hope for the future of humanity? Just a casual question.
Well, um, I'm an optimist, and I know that, depending on where you are in the world right now and so forth, it can feel a bit like we're going in the wrong direction. But by most measures, and putting aside, obviously the horrifying stuff going on in Ukraine, but by most measures, the world is becoming more peaceful. The world is becoming healthier. The world, there's less poverty, there's less disease, and so forth. Now, on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't feel that way. But that's sort of, statistically what's going on. People are better educated, all that sort of thing. So I actually believe that, we are in a progressive situation where we are making progress. And a lot of that is technology enabled. And I'm not talking about computers. I mean, even things like electricity and air conditioning. I mean, there's a lot of, technological innovations in the last 200 years that have enabled humanity to just make a lot of progress. Now, I have a theory about where that leads to, which is kind of goes back to the novel that I wrote, Journey, which is the first of a trilogy. And in that trilogy, I am writing a story about the progression of mankind to its ultimate end state, which has a little bit of a singularity, play to it. So I believe, so not to get metaphysical or spiritual, but I actually believe we are moving on a path that will take us into the metaphysical world, and we really won't see much of a difference between that world and the world we're in now. But along the way, a lot of things can go wrong. And also you can have it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And, obviously there's a lot of things with technology that can be used and abused. But I'm an optimist. I don't know.
Oh, I really appreciate that positive thinking, and it's about, what timeline you opt or subscribe to. And it's great that you're at the helm with Kathy, with your higher values and ethics, with all of this journey that we're going to be on with the convergence of tech and the metaverse. So as a leader in this space of design and marketing and beyond, what is your advice that you can give to, future generations and aspiring design, human-centric marketers as well?
Well, one is, it's interesting. I mean, if say the last 20 years were the years of the software engineer, I mean, the joke being, what do I want? What do I do when I grow up? Well, either become an investment banker if all you care about is money, or, a software engineer if you just want to always have a job. I think that, we're moving into the world where software engineers obviously are always going to be, valuable. But the creative services side, I think we'll have more and more creators in this world. I think we're kind of poised for a renaissance for, the creative community. And I use that term very broadly. That's exciting for me because that's where I started out in my life, with storytelling and writing. And I just think that, you can sort of see it with the sort of micro-influencer creator market today. And I'm not saying all the things being created are going to be, Michelangelo level, beauty and art. A lot of it's going to be trashy and kind of like, really, I didn't need to see that. But still, that's just sort of the way creativity works. So, I mean, I would say for people that it's never been a better time to be a creator than now, and what's going to happen over the next 20 years. So that's, I think, exciting for at least that sort of group of people like yourself in, your career.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Andy, on that note, for joining the Hollership today.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.